productive skill of writing can be quite overwhelming for low-level students. Many students simply have a barrier in their heads about putting English words on paper and making sure those words are spelled correctly and put in the right order. In order to push our students past this, we need to have writing activities that are both engaging and motivating. So there's some criteria to keep in mind when you're selecting writing activities for your low-level students. The activity should have very clear and simple instructions. The writing that students are doing should be clearly structured. The tasks should be very controlled. And finally, the tasks should be scaffolded so students can take a step-by-step process to the writing task. So in this session, we'll take you through some really good writing activities to use with your low-level students. In this session, we'll look at different categories of activities to use with your low-level students for writing. We'll start with activities that use prompts, so different ways to prompt students to write. Then we'll look at writing instructions, writing poems, and writing a journal. We'll wrap up the session with a quick look at ideas for getting students to share their writing with their classmates. Writing activity that use prompts as a way to get students writing are really effective with low-level students. These prompts serve as scaffolding to help get students thinking in English and writing in English. So the prompts can come from different sources and you can use them in different ways. So let's take a look at some examples of activities that use prompts. The first type of prompt that we can use is pictures, any visual material. So you can give students a single picture or a series of pictures, and then they write about what's going on in the picture. A really fun type of prompt to use is a comic strip prompt. Take a classic comic strip and pull out the dialogue. Just leave the dialogue bubbles empty. Students then have the task of putting dialogue back in to tell their own story. We can prompt students with the beginning of a sentence, and then they have to write the end of the sentence. So this type of writing activity gets students working at the sentence level. So I give them the first part of the sentence, and then they have to write the second part. We can also use real objects to prompt our students in writing. Bring in a selection of interesting or unusual objects and display them at the front of the class. Students then select an object and write about it. They can either write a description of the object, speculate about what it's used for, or write a story that involves the object. We can get our students writing simple 1 or 2 paragraph stories or narratives by giving them the beginning of a story. The beginning is just 2 or 3 sentences to get their thoughts rolling. Students then write the remainder of the story. A really effective way to get students to write is to use question prompts. So we give students a series of questions, and as they answer them in the exact order given, they generate a piece of writing. So for example, I could give students a series of questions about themselves. As they answer these questions, they write a short autobiographical paragraph. I can also give them a series of questions about a real event. And as they answer the questions, they describe the narrative of this event. Finally, I can get them to be more creative. I can give them a series of questions that as they answer them, they generate a story. Here are some examples of questions that you can ask students to prompt them to write an autobiographical paragraph. What do you look like? What adjectives describe you as a person? What do you like to do in your free time? And who is in your family? Here's a set of questions to prompt students to write about a real event that happened. So they're writing a real narrative. So here are the questions. Where were you? When were you there? Who was with you? What happened? And how did you feel? Here's a fun series of questions to prompt students to write a short science fiction story. So they answer the questions, what planet are you on? What does it look like? Why are you there? Who's there with you? And describe them. Why can't you get back to Earth? What danger are you in? And what happened? Another category of writing activity or writing task to use with low-level students is writing instructions. Instructions use the imperative, which is a very frequently used structure in English. And it's also a fairly simple structure, so low-level students can master this structure quite easily. Examples of sets of instructions that you can have students write include how to use a specific electronic gadget, how to drive a car, how to complete a specific household chore, such as vacuuming or cleaning, how to play a sport, how to use a bank machine, or how to create a dish or a particular type of food. This last one becomes a recipe, but a recipe is simply a set of instructions. The third type of category to have low-level students do is writing poems. Poems, if they're very short and have a very simple structure, are an effective way to get students to produce written work. Short poems only require students to produce 1 or 2 words, or short phrases. They also allow students to personalize their writing and be creative. So let's take a look at some very simple poems that you can use with your low-level students. The first type of poem is a definition poem. In a definition poem, students describe something or talk about something or someone that means a lot to them. The teacher can set the topic for the definition poem, or the students can select the topic themselves. A definition poem is usually 5 to 10 lines long. Here's an example of a definition poem about spring. Spring is happy. Spring is bright and sunny. Spring is like waking up after a long sleep. Spring is rainy and green. Spring is like starting a new life. Spring is joy. The next type of poem is called a 5 senses poem. In this poem, students write about a topic and describe it using each of the 5 senses. So the title of the poem gives the topic, and then each subsequent line uses one of the senses to describe the topic. So the poem is 5 lines long. Here's an example. Finding a new best friend. Sounds like singing. Looks like the sun coming through the clouds after rain. Tastes like chocolate milk. Feels like soft wool. Smells like freshly baked bread. The next type of poem is called an I wish poem. Students write 4 or 5 lines, each beginning with the words I wish. They can write wishes about a single topic, or they can write all of the wishes or any wishes that they have at that particular point in time. Here's an example on the topic food. I wish I had a chocolate chip cookie. I wish I had an ice cream cone. I wish I had a big cake with candles on it. I wish I had a glass of milk. The next type of poem is called a color poem. This poem is 4 or 5 sentences long, and each sentence begins either with the same color word, for example the word red, or a different color word. Here's an example with each sentence beginning with the color word red. Red is like my heart. Red is like my nose in the winter. Red is like my favorite dress. Red is like my mother's lipstick. The last type of poem we'll look at is called an if I were poem. This actually looks a little more difficult than it actually is because it uses the grammatical structure, if I were such and such, I would such and such. However, students don't have to add a lot of creative language, so the task is a little simpler than you would think. So in this type of poem, students write the first line using if I were. They then write 3 lines using would. Here's an example. If I were a daisy, I would be bright and cheerful. Everyone would be happy when they looked at me. I would stand tall and proud. A child would pick me and take me home to her mother. The next type of activity that's good for low-level students to work on their writing is journal writing. Don't get me wrong, by journal writing I don't mean having students write paragraphs on a daily basis or pages on a daily basis. What we want to do, however, is just get them into the habit of writing. So we want to have regular, manageable writing tasks, and this is what journal writing can provide. There are 4 different approaches or ideas that you can have students write about. The first one is they simply write a few sentences or a paragraph about what they did recently, so what they did last weekend or yesterday. Another approach is to have students respond to prompts. So as the teacher, we give them a beginning for their diary entry, and then they have to write the ending. Another alternative is simply to have students complete different writing tasks. So, for example, write a paragraph about your mother, write a paragraph about your father, and so on. And finally, we can have students describe a photograph that they bring in. So students might bring in a personal photograph from a recent event, and then they write a paragraph about that photograph. Here's a final thought on writing for low-level students. We want to get our low-level students to the point where they're comfortable having other people read their English writing. We don't want them to think that their writing is just for themselves. So we want to build into our writing classes different strategies or techniques to get students sharing their writing with the other students in the class. Here are some possibilities. The simplest way to get students to share their work is to have them read it aloud. So students can read their writing to a partner or a small group or even to the whole class. Another idea is to have students create a multimedia presentation that includes their writing. So they can combine their written words with pictures and so on and put it into a PowerPoint, for example. Another option is to post student work on a bulletin board. So you can have a class writing bulletin board in your class, and every week you can put up new samples of student writing. Here's another idea. Collect all of the student writing for a week or a month or even a term and publish it into a class anthology. So this published document includes writing from all of the students in the class. Finally, you can have students publish their work on the internet, either through a Facebook page or a class wiki space, for example. So there's lots of ways to get students sharing their written work with everyone else. Writing in English can be very daunting for low-level students. The activities we've taken you through in this session make the task of writing much more manageable for low-level students. And when tasks are manageable, students feel more comfortable doing them, more motivated, and they also feel successful at the end of the task. So have some fun trying these activities out with your students.